Paternity leave is over, which means it is time to catch you all up on what I've been playing. So let's roll it back a few months to talk about the games I played in February. I kicked off the month with Lysfanga the Time Shift Warrior, a hack and slash game built around a pretty interesting time loop mechanic. Essentially, each fight requires you to kill every enemy in the combat arena before a mysterious rift explodes. The twist is when you die or willingly reset, you are set back to the start of the fight with a clone of yourself called a remnant that performs the exact actions of your previous run. So you pretty much work with past versions of yourself to take everything out. The game does some pretty clever stuff around this, like having some enemies that will only stay dead if they are killed within a few seconds of each other, and others that need to be distracted by either yourself or a remnant as the other takes it out. As you progress, you'll unlock more remnants, which not only gives you more chances at each encounter, but also offers a fair bit of flexibility in terms of overcoming these challenges. Now, while this is a really cool concept that they do a lot of cool things with, I found the difficulty curve of the game to be a bit off. The first act is extremely easy. It doesn't take much planning or really thought in general to clear the enemies, causing the interesting premise to feel a bit flat. The game does have a solution of sorts for this in the form of time challenges, which, as you could probably have guessed, task you with finishing the fight in a certain amount of time. And honestly, I think engaging with these challenges is when the game is at its best, as it pushes you to plan out your route and have a strong understanding of your character's abilities to be able to get it done in time. It makes it so you actually have to work in tandem with your remnants instead of just brute forcing your way through all of the levels. The problem with this is that there isn't really a reason to do the time challenges other than because you want to. And I know that's enough for some people, but I always struggle when there's no extrinsic motivation. Somewhere in the middle of Act 2, when the game got a fair bit harder and it started to take more effort to do some of the time challenges, I ended up abandoning them altogether because they pretty much only served to mess up the pacing of the game. The second half of the title definitely calls for a lot more thought than the first, so I was still mostly satisfied with the gameplay despite not having to be as strategic as I was when going for the time trials, but I did find myself wishing for a middle ground where I was incentivized to do the time trials but could skip past ones that were taking too long. I think a progression system like Neon White's could have benefited Lysfanga a fair bit. In it, you need to reach a certain rank in order to unlock the next set of levels, which means that you can't just simply clear each stage. You have to reach a threshold of points that are earned from the medals you get from hitting certain times. This pushes you to look for quicker ways through each level, making you engage with the most interesting mechanics in the game. But you can still reach that threshold without hitting the fastest time on each stage, so you don't have to always be perfect. Obviously, this approach would have to be tweaked to work for Lysfanga, but I do think it would have made doing the time challenges feel worth it. Alternatively, they could have just offered some sort of useful reward, and that would have probably gone a long way. Really, in general, the game has a bit of a reward problem. Spells and weapons are obtained largely through story progression, but in a way that often feels kind of random. And there are a few collectibles that can be obtained from exploration, like shards that give you more remnants and orbs that unlock cosmetics, but nothing is really earned from the actual combat, and there is no way to upgrade the stuff you get, leading to it all feeling a bit underwhelming. I don't know, I have no proof of this, but based on a lot of ideas in the game, the devs seem like they had bigger plans for what it would be like and had to scale them down a fair bit, and aspects that either should have been adjusted or cut still made it in, leading to a handful of things that feel underdeveloped and disconnected. Anyway, at its core, it is a very clever title with a killer concept that I imagine most of you will have a ton of fun with. I definitely am being harder on it than I've been on games I've liked way less, mostly because I think it missed its full potential, which is too bad as an idea like this has a ton of it. So yeah, it is very much worth playing, but more than anything, it makes me want to see what these devs could do next time now that they have the experience of this one under their belt. After that, I played Chants of Sonar, a puzzle game recommended to me by my patrons, and it was a good time. The core of the gameplay is centered around deciphering languages belonging to the inhabitants of a handful of mysterious civilizations. It starts off with simple concepts like open and close that are easy enough to figure out, but as the game goes on, some words center on grander ideas that take more thought and context to figure out. My favorite part about the whole process was figuring out how each of the languages work. There are plenty of shared words between the civilizations, but they all have ones unique to them and also different perspectives on the same things. Additionally, the languages have varying levels of complexity in terms of syntax, and figuring out not just what all the words mean, but also how each civilization forms a sentence was a lot of fun to discover. It's just really clever in its design and makes you feel like a genius without ever being frustratingly hard. If you like The Return of the Obra Dinn or The Case of the Golden Idol, this will be right up your alley. Now, it does have some issues, the big one for me being that the mechanics mechanic that allows you to actually solve what certain words mean is a bit finicky. Pretty much once you encounter a set amount of clues that should make it clear to you what certain symbols stand for, your character draws pictures in their journal that you then can match with the designated symbol. But there were times where this happened before I had actually put the clues together, and it made the answer extremely obvious. Also, there were a few times where I figured out what a symbol meant, but hadn't found what the game deemed as the proper clue, so I had to run around engaging with everything in order to complete the language. Neither of these things ruined my enjoyment of the game, but they did happen enough for me to want to dedicate 4 sentences of this video to complaining about them. It also suffers from an issue that I've talked about in the past that often comes up with puzzle games, of there being too long of a gap between figuring out an answer to a puzzle and actually solving it. There were a few times where I needed one word in order to get past an obstacle, and that required me to run to the other side of an area and then all the way back to where the puzzle was before being able to finish it. And when this happened, it always took a fair bit of time. I will say though, I found myself less bothered with this in Chants of Sennaar than I have with other games, largely because of how beautiful the environments of this title are. Each area is unique and gorgeous, and the game has a fixed camera of sorts that does a lot of interesting things with angles and movements, leading to a handful of stunning moments that made the world feel massive and alive. While not ideal, the long walks back were infrequent enough where I still found myself enjoying seeing the beautiful environments again. Your mileage may vary there though. Anyway, it's a good game that I'd bet you, yes, you specifically, would enjoy. Then I ended the month with Penny's Big Breakaway, a 3D platformer with some of the most satisfying movement I've experienced in a game for a good while. Pretty much every move can be chained into another, and while this can be said for plenty of 3D platformers, I can't think of a ton where it feels this natural to pull off. After learning the core moves, I knew exactly how to combo them together to keep my momentum up and get anywhere I wanted to go. And even though it has a pretty low skill floor, there is still a wildly high skill ceiling for those who want to zip around each stage as fast as possible. I appreciated that I felt competent from the start, but still had a lot of room to get better in regards to timing and what moves to turn to in any given situation. The stages themselves are solid and generally introduce some new gimmick to keep things fresh, although I can't really think of any that truly blew me away. The star of the game really is the movement though, so I didn't find myself all too bothered by that. Like most 3D platformers, there are a handful of things to do within each level aside from completing it, the main two being collecting hidden coins and solving dilemmas for NPCs. I had a lot of fun finding the hidden coins. Typically when it comes to stage-based platformers, I love figuring out where the developers might stash a secret, and a lot of them here offered neat little challenges to overcome. The dilemmas on the other hand were a bit more hit or miss. Pretty much they are quick little side quests that ask you to do all sorts of things, like score a certain amount of points in a set area, or collect items spread across the level, or reach a destination without getting hit. In terms of difficulty, they end up ranging from so easy that you don't even realize you did anything, to hard in a way that doesn't feel all that fair. The latter mostly comes in the form of time challenges, which I think are fine in theory, but the problem is the timer starts right when you pass the NPC given the quest, and on the first time through a level, you have no idea what they're going to ask. So most of the time, I ended up losing a few seconds to processing what I needed to even do, and as the window for some of them is pretty tight, I'd often fail and have to reload from a prior checkpoint, which on a few occasions put me way before the challenge. This is a small want, but I do wish there had been a way to just reload from the start of a dilemma instead of the nearest checkpoint. And while I'm complaining about stuff that didn't have a massive impact on my enjoyment of the game, but did register as annoying, I found that its fixed camera angle sometimes made it hard to judge the depth of floating objects, leading to a few jumps feeling like a guessing game. This isn't a problem all that often, but as the levels generally are so easy to read and understand, it does stick out when it comes up. And I'm not saying this isn't at all a skill issue, but it's not something I've struggled with in most of the 3D platformers I've played, so I feel like it's not all my fault, just maybe partially. I don't know. Maybe I'm just bad. Technically, you can adjust the camera angle a little bit, but doing so while actually playing requires a wild claw grip that is not worth the effort. The last thing I found to be a little underbaked were the boss fights. Between stuff like hard to read hitboxes and mid-boss health drops that are almost impossible to get because they spawn on the boss and disappear almost immediately, they all just feel a bit janky and aren't well suited for Penny's movements. There are some creative ideas within them, but the execution felt a bit lacking. Anyway, despite these complaints, the core of the game is super enjoyable for anyone who likes smooth platformers, and I'd recommend it to pretty much everyone. I do want to say, when it comes to all three of these games, I definitely am being harsher on them than I've been with worse titles. Sometimes when a game is pretty dang solid, it is just easier to notice the issues with it and get stuck thinking about them a bit too much. So yeah, if it seems like I didn't like them based on everything I've said in this video, that is not the case. They just had enough issues to keep them from reaching the heights that I thought they might when I first started them. It's like the difference between great and incredible. incredible. Okay, that's all. I'll see you next time, unless I decide to stop doing this.